My son told the real estate agent that his elderly mother didn't understand the paperwork for selling her house. The paperwork in my safe would have shown him that his elderly mother had once been authorized to conduct operations that required security clearances higher than most government officials would ever see. My name is Betty, and at 77 years old, I had apparently become incapable of managing my own property according to my family, who had decided that selling my house was necessary for my financial security and their peace of mind about my living arrangements. The discovery that my family had listed my house for sale came when I returned from my weekly grocery shopping to find strangers walking through my living room, measuring windows and discussing renovation plans with my son Michael and his wife Sandra. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said when he saw me standing in my own doorway, holding bags of groceries while watching people evaluate my furniture and discuss my belongings, as if I wasn't there. "Michael, who are these people in my house?" "Mom, they're potential buyers. We've decided that it's time for you to downsize to something more manageable." Potential buyers? In my house, looking at my possessions, making plans for my property without my knowledge or consent. "Michael, I didn't agree to sell my house."
Mom, we've discussed this. Living in a 3-bedroom house by yourself isn't practical anymore. You need something smaller, safer, and closer to family support.
"We've discussed this. I had no memory of any discussion about selling my house, probably because no such discussion had ever taken place. Michael and Sandra had made the decision unilaterally and were now presenting it as a collaborative family choice. "I don't recall any discussion about selling my house, Michael." "Mom, that's exactly the problem. Your memory isn't reliable anymore. You're forgetting conversations, misplacing important documents, and making financial decisions that don't make sense." My memory wasn't reliable. Financial decisions that didn't make sense. Michael was creating a narrative of cognitive decline that justified treating me as incapable of managing my own affairs. "Michael, what financial decisions are you referring to?" "Mom, you've been spending money on things you don't need, paying for services that are overpriced, and making choices about home maintenance that suggest you don't understand current market conditions. Spending money on things I didn't need, like the security system upgrades, the reinforced locks, and the document storage solutions that were actually necessary for protecting assets and information that Michael knew nothing about." Sandra approached with a folder of real estate documents and the patronizing smile of someone who thought she was solving problems for a person who couldn't solve them herself. "Betty, we found a lovely apartment complex that's perfect for seniors. It has activities, meal services, and medical support available 24 hours a day." Activities, meal services, and medical support. Sandra was describing assisted living facilities, not independent housing arrangements. "Sandra, I don't need assisted living services. I'm managing fine in my own home." "Betty, that's what all elderly people say before they have accidents or medical emergencies that could have been prevented with proper supervision." Proper supervision. Sandra was talking about my living situation, as if I were a child who needed adult oversight rather than an adult who had the right to make decisions about my own housing and lifestyle. But here's what Michael and Sandra didn't know about my house, my financial situation, and my reasons for maintaining specific security and privacy measures in my living arrangements. The house they were planning to sell wasn't just my residence. It was a secure location that had been chosen and modified according to federal security protocols for retired intelligence operatives who might require ongoing protection or who maintained access to classified information. The expensive security systems they thought were unnecessary weren't paranoid purchases by a confused elderly woman. They were required security measures for someone whose career had involved operations that created potential ongoing risks requiring professional-grade protection. The reinforced locks, the document storage solutions, and the privacy measures they considered excessive weren't signs of declining judgment. They were continuation of security protocols that I had maintained since retirement from a career that they knew nothing about. "Mom," Michael continued, "the real estate market is strong right now. If we sell quickly, you'll have enough money from the house sale to pay for assisted living for several years." Pay for assisted living for several years. Michael was calculating the financial timeline for institutional care based on the proceeds from selling property that he assumed represented my primary asset. "Michael, what makes you think that selling my house would be necessary to pay for my living expenses?" "Mom, we know what your retirement income is. We know what your savings account contains. We've calculated what level of care you can afford. They knew what my retirement income was. They knew what my savings account contained. Michael and Sandra had been investigating my financial situation and making assumptions about my resources based on incomplete information. Michael, how do you know what my financial situation is? Mom, we've been helping you manage your affairs for months. We've seen your bank statements, your Social Security payments, and your investment accounts. Helping me manage my affairs. Michael and Sandra had gained access to some of my financial information and had assumed that what they could see represented the complete extent of my resources and assets. The truth was that my visible financial accounts represented a small fraction of my actual assets, which were structured through federal retirement systems, intelligence agency pension programs, and security classified investment accounts that were designed to be invisible to family members or other civilians who might gain access to my personal information. Mom, the important thing is that we're taking care of this for you so you don't have to worry about complicated real estate transactions and financial planning. Taking care of this for me. Michael and Sandra were selling my house and planning my future living arrangements without my input, because they had decided that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. Michael, I need to ask you something important. Do you have legal authority to sell my house? Mom, we're your family. We're doing this because we love you and want to make sure you're safe and secure. Love and safety, but not legal authority. Michael and Sandra were proceeding with real estate transactions based on family relationship rather than legal authorization to make decisions about my property. Michael, that doesn't answer my question. Do you have power of attorney or legal guardianship that gives you authority to sell my property? Mom, we don't need formal legal documents. You're our family, and we're helping you make necessary decisions. No formal legal documents. Michael and Sandra were attempting to sell property that didn't belong to them without legal authority to conduct real estate transactions on my behalf. But here's what they were about to discover when they tried to complete their unauthorized real estate transaction. Here's the information that would change everything they thought they knew about my house, my identity, and their ability to make decisions about my property and my future. The house they were trying to sell was registered through federal property management systems that required security clearance to access or modify. The deed and ownership documents were stored in a secure facility that required federal authorization to release. The property transfer would trigger background investigations of any potential buyers to ensure that classified information storage locations didn't fall into unauthorized hands. Most importantly, the safe in my bedroom contained documents that would reveal why my house couldn't be sold through normal real estate channels, and why my son's assumptions about my identity and my capabilities were about to lead him into legal problems that would require federal intervention to resolve. The question was whether I should allow Michael and Sandra to continue with their unauthorized sale attempt until they discovered these complications on their own, or whether I should reveal the truth about my background and explain why their real estate plans were impossible to execute. The choice would determine not just the future of my housing situation, but their understanding of who I really was and why some elderly adults might have security requirements and legal protections that go far beyond what families typically encounter in normal real estate transactions. The real estate closing that Michael and Sandra had scheduled for the following week required them to provide documentation that they assumed would be straightforward to obtain from my personal files and home safe. Their attempt to access these documents would reveal why my property couldn't be sold through conventional real estate channels. Mom, we need you to give us the combination to your safe so we can get the deed and other paperwork for the house sale, Sandra announced as she stood in my bedroom, looking at the secure document storage system that I had installed according to federal security protocols. Sandra, why do you need access to my safe? The real estate attorney needs original copies of the property deed, insurance documents, and any other legal papers related to the house ownership. Property deed, insurance documents, and legal papers that were stored in a secure facility designed to protect classified information and government documents from unauthorized access. Sandra, I'm not comfortable giving anyone the combination to my personal safe. Mom, we're your family. We're not going to steal anything. We just need the paperwork to complete the sale that's in your best interest. In my best interest. Sandra was justifying unauthorized access to secured documents based on family relationship and her assumption that she was helping with beneficial real estate transactions. Sandra, what if I told you that some of the documents in my safe aren't related to the house and might not be appropriate for you to see? Mom, we don't care about your personal papers. We just need the house-related documents. Personal papers. Sandra assumed that any documents I considered private would be typical elderly person's keepsakes rather than materials that required security clearance to access legally. Michael joined the conversation with the frustrated tone of someone who thought that paperwork complications were evidence of an elderly woman's inability to organize her affairs properly. Mom, this is exactly why we need to handle your financial and legal matters for you. You're making simple real estate transactions complicated by being secretive about basic documents. Secretive about basic documents. Michael interpreted my security protocols as elderly confusion, rather than recognition that some documents required protection from unauthorized access. Michael, what if I told you that accessing my safe without proper authorization might create legal problems for both of us? Mom, that's nonsense. Your family property documents, not state secrets. State secrets. Michael's casual dismissal of security concerns was about to collide with the reality of what was actually stored in my safe and why unauthorized access could trigger federal security investigations. Michael, I need you to understand something important. Some of the documents in my safe are not typical personal papers. They require special handling and authorized access. Mom, you're being paranoid. What could you possibly have in there that would require special handling? What could I possibly have? Federal security clearance certificates, classified document access authorizations, intelligence agency service records, and retirement credentials from a career that had required the highest levels of security classification in government service. But Michael and Sandra had decided that my concerns about document security were evidence of elderly paranoia rather than legitimate protection of materials that could create legal complications if accessed by unauthorized personnel. Mom, we're going to need those documents by Friday for the real estate closing. If you won't give us the combination, we'll have to call a locksmith to open the safe. Call a locksmith to open a secure federal document storage system. Michael and Sandra were planning to use civilian contractors to access materials that required federal security clearance to handle legally. Michael, I strongly advise against having a locksmith open my safe. Mom, you're not giving us a choice. The sale is scheduled, the buyers are ready, and we need those documents. The sale is scheduled. Michael and Sandra had committed to real estate transactions without ensuring they had legal access to the required documentation or authorization to sell property that might not be transferable through normal channels. Michael, what if I told you that attempting to access my safe without proper authorization could result in federal security investigations? Mom, you're talking nonsense. There's nothing in your safe that would interest federal agencies. Nothing that would interest federal agencies. Michael's assumption was about to be tested when he discovered exactly what kinds of documents retired intelligence operatives maintain in secure storage and why unauthorized access triggers automatic security protocols. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the real estate attorney who had been hired to handle the closing paperwork and who expected to receive standard property documentation for a routine residential sale. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Attorney Williams. I understand you have the property documents for tomorrow's closing? Mrs. Johnson. The attorney was addressing me with the respect due to a property owner, unaware that my family had been conducting real estate negotiations without my knowledge or consent. Attorney Williams. I think there may be some confusion about this real estate transaction. What kind of confusion, Mrs. Johnson? I haven't authorized the sale of my property. My family has been conducting these negotiations without my knowledge or legal consent. Attorney Williams looked between me and Michael with the expression of someone who was beginning to realize that the real estate transaction he had been hired to complete might not be legally valid. Mr. Anderson, do you have power of attorney or legal guardianship that authorizes you to sell your mother's property? Attorney Williams, we're her family. We're helping her make necessary decisions about downsizing and financial planning. Mr. Anderson, that doesn't answer my question. Do you have legal documentation that authorizes you to act on your mother's behalf in real estate transactions?
Legal documentation.
Attorney Williams was asking for the formal authorization that Michael and Sandra had assumed was unnecessary for family members conducting transactions they considered beneficial.
Attorney Williams, we don't have formal legal documents, but Mom's cognitive decline makes it necessary for family to help with complex financial decisions.
Cognitive decline. Michael was asserting that my mental condition justified unauthorized real estate transactions, but without medical or legal evidence to support claims of incompetency. Mr. Anderson, I'm going to need to speak with Mrs. Johnson privately to confirm her understanding of this transaction and her consent to proceed with the sale. Attorney Williams was implementing standard legal protocols to ensure that property owners were knowingly and willingly participating in real estate transactions, protocols that would reveal whether I was competent to make my own decisions and whether I had actually authorized the sale. Attorney Williams, I need to tell you that I haven't authorized this sale. I don't consent to selling my property, and my family doesn't have legal authority to conduct real estate transactions on my behalf. Mrs. Johnson, are you saying that you don't want to sell your house? Attorney Williams, I'm saying that I want to maintain ownership of my property, and that any attempts to sell it without my consent would be illegal. The conversation that followed required Attorney Williams to explain to Michael and Sandra that they had been conducting unauthorized real estate transactions that could result in legal consequences for fraud, elder abuse, and attempts to sell property without legal authority. But the real complications would emerge when Michael and Sandra attempted to access my safe to obtain documents they thought would support their real estate plans, only to discover that the contents would trigger federal security investigations that would reveal why some elderly adults have legal protections and security requirements that go far beyond typical family property disputes. The choice I faced was whether to continue allowing them to discover these complications through their own illegal actions, or whether to reveal my background and explain why their assumptions about my identity and my property were about to create problems that would require federal intervention to resolve. The decision to open my safe came after Michael and Sandra had spent 2 days trying to convince me to provide the combination voluntarily, and after the real estate attorney had explained that the property sale couldn't proceed without proper documentation and legal authorization. Mom, we've hired a professional safe technician who can open the safe without damaging any of the documents inside, Michael announced as he led a uniformed locksmith into my bedroom. Michael, I've told you repeatedly that opening my safe without authorization could create serious problems. Mom, we need those property documents. The buyers are threatening to withdraw their offer, and we'll lose the opportunity to sell the house at current market prices. Current market prices. Michael was prioritizing real estate market conditions over security protocols and legal authorization requirements that he didn't understand but was about to encounter directly. The safe technician, a professional locksmith named Tom Rodriguez, examined my document storage system with the careful attention of someone who recognized that it was more sophisticated than typical residential safes. Ma'am, this is a high-security document storage system. It's designed for protecting valuable papers and sensitive materials. Are you sure you want me to open it without the combination? Mr. Rodriguez, I don't want anyone to open my safe. My family is insisting on access to documents that I believe should remain secure.
Ma'am, I need to ask, are any of the documents in this safe related to legal proceedings, government records, or other materials that might require special handling?
Legal proceedings, government records, or materials that might require special handling. Mr. Rodriguez was asking questions that suggested he understood the potential complications of accessing secured documents without proper authorization. Mr. Rodriguez, some of the documents in my safe are government-related and might require special handling. Michael interrupted before I could provide more specific information about the nature of the documents or the security requirements for accessing them. Mr. Rodriguez, she's being overly cautious. These are just normal property documents that we need for a real estate transaction. Normal property documents. Michael was instructing the locksmith to proceed based on assumptions about the contents of my safe rather than investigating what might actually be stored there. Mr. Rodriguez, I want to be very clear that I don't consent to opening this safe, and I believe that accessing the contents without proper authorization could create legal complications. Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but your family has hired me to open the safe, and they've signed documents taking responsibility for any contents that might be discovered. Signed documents taking responsibility. Michael and Sandra had accepted legal liability for accessing materials that they hadn't investigated and whose nature they didn't understand. Mr. Rodriguez spent 30 minutes working on the safe's security systems, using professional tools and techniques to bypass the electronic locks and security protocols that had been designed to prevent unauthorized access. Okay, I've got it open. Ma'am, would you like to supervise while your family accesses the documents they need? Supervise while my family access documents they needed. Mr. Rodriguez was offering me the opportunity to monitor what Michael and Sandra would discover when they investigated the contents of secured government document storage. Mr. Rodriguez! Yes, I think it's very important that I supervise this process. Michael reached into the safe and began pulling out document folders, certificates, and sealed envelopes that contained the materials I had been storing, according to federal security requirements for retired intelligence personnel. The first documents he encountered were my federal security clearance certificates, including top-secret clearance documentation and special compartmented information access authorizations that were current and required renewal verification with multiple government agencies. Mom, what are these documents? They look like government security clearances. Michael, those are my security clearance certificates from my federal career. Your federal career? Mom, you worked as a secretary. Worked as a secretary. Michael's assumption about my career was about to collide with documentation proving that I had held some of the highest security clearances available in government service. Sandra took the documents from Michael and began reading the official seals, security classifications, and agency authorizations that were printed on materials she had never encountered before. Betty, these documents say you had top-secret security clearance with special access programs. What does that mean? Special access programs. Sandra was reading about security classifications that were higher than most government employees would ever be authorized to access or even know about. Sandra, it means that my federal career involved access to classified information and operations that required the highest levels of security clearance. Michael continued removing documents from the safe, discovering federal service medals, commendation certificates from intelligence agencies, and retirement credentials that detailed a career spanning 30 years of government service in classified operations. Mom, this medal is from the Central Intelligence Agency, and this certificate is from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and this one is from, I can't even pronounce this agency name. Multiple intelligence agencies had recognized my service with awards and commendations that were now being discovered by family members who had assumed I was a retired secretary, whose most significant accomplishment was maintaining organized personal files. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come when Michael found the sealed envelope containing my official retirement credentials and the ongoing security requirements that continued to apply to my living situation, my personal security, and my property ownership. Mom, this document says you're a retired federal agent with ongoing security considerations. What does that mean? Ongoing security considerations. The document Michael was reading explained why my house had special security features, why my personal information was protected from civilian access, and why my property couldn't be sold through normal real estate channels without federal security reviews. Mr. Rodriguez had been listening to this conversation with growing concern about the documents he had helped access and the potential legal implications of his involvement in opening secured government document storage. Ma'am, I need to ask, are these the kinds of documents that require federal authorization to access legally? Mr. Rodriguez, yes, these are exactly the kinds of documents that require federal authorization to access, and their discovery by unauthorized personnel will trigger automatic security investigations. Security investigations. Mr. Rodriguez, Michael, and Sandra had all become involved in unauthorized access to classified materials and protected government documents, activities that would require federal agencies to investigate the security breach and take appropriate protective measures. Mom, are you saying that we're in legal trouble for opening your safe? Michael, I'm saying that you've accessed federal security documents without authorization, which will require government agencies to investigate the breach and determine whether national security information has been compromised. The silence that followed was the silence of people who were beginning to understand that they had created problems much more serious than complicated real estate transactions. But the documents in my safe contained more information that would complete their understanding of why some elderly adults have security requirements, legal protections, and property ownership arrangements that can't be managed through normal family decision-making processes. The revelation of my intelligence career was just the beginning of their education about the hidden complexities of my identity, my background, and my reasons for maintaining security protocols that had seemed like paranoid elderly behavior, but were actually continuation of professional requirements that extended far beyond retirement. The phone call I had been expecting came exactly 18 hours after Michael and Sandra had accessed my secured documents. The caller was Agent Patricia Martinez from the Federal Security Review Office, and her first question addressed the automatic security protocols that had been triggered by unauthorized access to my protected materials. Mrs. Johnson, this is Agent Martinez from Federal Security Review. We've been notified that your secured document storage has been accessed by unauthorized personnel. Can you confirm the nature of this security breach? Agent Martinez. Yes, my family opened my safe without my consent in order to obtain documents for an unauthorized real estate transaction. Mrs. Johnson, can you confirm the identity of the personnel who accessed your classified materials? Agent Martinez. My son Michael Anderson and his wife Sandra Anderson opened my safe with the assistance of a civilian locksmith named Tom Rodriguez.
Mrs. Johnson, we'll need to schedule immediate security interviews with all personnel involved in this breach. Can you ensure that they remain available for federal investigation?
Federal investigation. Agent Martinez was implementing security protocols that would require Michael, Sandra, and Mr. Rodriguez to undergo background investigations and security interviews to determine the extent of potential security compromise. Agent Martinez. I can inform them about the investigation, but I should mention that they were unaware of the classified nature of the documents they accessed. Mrs. Johnson. Lack of awareness doesn't eliminate the need for security review. All personnel who have accessed classified materials must undergo investigation regardless of their intent or knowledge. Agent Martinez explained that the security breach would require a comprehensive review of my living situation, my ongoing security requirements, and the potential risks created by family members who now possessed knowledge of classified information and protected personal details. Mrs. Johnson will also need to conduct a security assessment of your residential location to determine whether continued occupation is advisable given the compromise of your protected status. Continued occupation. Agent Martinez was explaining that the security breach created by my family's actions might require me to relocate to a more secure living situation, away from family members who had demonstrated inability to respect security protocols. The conversation that followed required me to explain to Michael and Sandra that their attempts to sell my house had triggered federal security investigations that would affect not just my living situation, but their legal status and their ability to maintain normal lives without ongoing government monitoring. Michael, I need to inform you that federal agents will be contacting you for security interviews related to your access to my classified documents. Federal agents? Mom, what are you talking about? Michael, when you opened my safe, you accessed materials that require federal security clearance to handle legally. Government agencies are required to investigate potential security breaches. But we didn't know the documents were classified. Michael, that doesn't eliminate the legal requirements for security investigation. You and Sandra will need to undergo background checks and interviews to determine whether national security information has been compromised. Sandra had been quiet during this conversation, processing the implications of her involvement in accessing federal security documents and the potential consequences for her personal and professional life. Betty, what kind of security interviews? What will they ask us? Sandra, federal security investigators will ask about your background, your associations, your financial situation, your foreign contacts, and your reliability for protecting classified information. Background investigations that would examine every aspect of Michael and Sandra's lives to determine whether their access to my classified materials created ongoing security risks that required monitoring or legal restrictions. Mom, this is insane. We were just trying to help you sell your house so you could live somewhere safer and more appropriate for your age. Safer and more appropriate. Michael still didn't understand that the house he had tried to sell was actually safer and more appropriate for my security requirements than any assisted living facility or family-supervised housing arrangement he might have preferred. Michael, my house is specifically configured for my security needs as a retired federal agent. It has protective features, location advantages, and security systems that were chosen based on professional threat assessments. Threat assessments? Mom, what kind of threats? Michael, during my federal career, I was involved in operations that created potential ongoing risks requiring protective measures that continued during retirement. Ongoing risks. Michael was beginning to understand that his elderly mother wasn't just a retired secretary, but someone whose federal career had created security considerations that affected where I could live, how my personal information could be shared, and why family members couldn't make decisions about my living situation without federal security reviews. Agent Martinez arrived the next day to conduct preliminary security interviews and to assess the extent of the security breach created by unauthorized access to my protected documents. Mrs. Johnson, we've reviewed the materials that were accessed, and we need to discuss the security implications of this breach. Agent Martinez, what are the security implications? Mrs. Johnson, your family members now possess knowledge of your classified service record, your ongoing security requirements, and your protected residential location. This information could be used to compromise your security or the security of other retired operatives. Compromise the security of other retired operatives. My family's attempt to sell my house had created security risks that extended beyond my personal situation to affect other intelligence personnel whose safety depended on protecting the identities and locations of retired agents. Agent Martinez, what does this mean for my family's legal situation? Mrs. Johnson, your family members will need to sign non-disclosure agreements, undergo ongoing security monitoring, and accept legal restrictions on their ability to share information about your background or your living situation. Legal restrictions. Michael and Sandra's attempt to help with my housing situation had resulted in federal oversight of their personal lives and legal limitations on their freedom to discuss my identity or my circumstances. But Agent Martinez had more serious concerns about the security breach and its implications for my continued safety and the safety of other intelligence personnel whose identities might be compromised through family connections. Mrs. Johnson, we also need to discuss the possibility that this security breach requires you to relocate to a more secure living arrangement with better protection from family interference in your security protocols. Relocate to a more secure living arrangement. Agent Martinez was suggesting that my family's actions might require me to move away from them entirely in order to maintain the security requirements that protected both me and other retired intelligence operatives. The choice I faced was whether to relocate away from family who had demonstrated unreliability with security matters, or whether to work with federal agencies to develop security protocols that would allow me to maintain family relationships while protecting classified information and ongoing operational security requirements. Either way, Michael and Sandra's real estate plans had been permanently complicated by the discovery that some elderly adults have legal protections, security requirements, and federal oversight that make normal family decision-making processes impossible to implement without government authorization and security reviews. The federal security briefing that Agent Martinez conducted for Michael and Sandra took place in my living room, but it felt more like a classroom where two adults were receiving their first education about national security, classified operations, and the ongoing protection requirements for retired intelligence personnel. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, before we discuss the legal implications of your security breach, I need to help you understand the nature of your mother's federal career and why certain protocols exist to protect retired operatives. Agent Martinez had prepared materials that would explain my career without revealing operational details that remained classified, but that would help my family understand why my living situation, my security requirements, and my property ownership couldn't be managed through normal family decision-making processes. Mrs. Johnson spent 30 years in federal service with multiple intelligence agencies. Her work involved operations that required the highest levels of security clearance and that created potential ongoing risks requiring protective measures during retirement. Multiple intelligence agencies. Agent Martinez was explaining that my career had involved more than just employment with a single government department, but coordination between various intelligence organizations whose work required extraordinary security measures. Agent Martinez, Sandra asked, what kind of work created ongoing risks that continue during retirement? Mrs. Anderson, retired intelligence personnel often maintain information about operations, personnel, and methods that could compromise national security if disclosed. They also may have been involved in operations that created personal security risks requiring ongoing protection. Personal security risks requiring ongoing protection. Agent Martinez was explaining why my house had security features that seemed excessive to family members, but that were actually required protective measures for someone whose career had created potential threats that didn't end with retirement. Michael looked confused. Agent Martinez, are you saying that Mom's life could be in danger because of her federal career? Mr. Anderson, I'm saying that retired intelligence personnel require ongoing security assessments and protective measures based on their service history and the potential risks associated with their background. security assessments and protective measures that explained why I couldn't simply move to assisted living facilities or family-supervised housing arrangements without federal security reviews and approval of any changes to my living situation. Agent Martinez, Sandra asked, what does this mean for our attempt to help Betty with housing that's more appropriate for her age and health needs? Mrs. Anderson, any changes to Mrs. Johnson's living situation require federal security review to ensure that her housing meets protective requirements and doesn't compromise operational security. Federal security review for housing changes. Agent Martinez was explaining that my family's real estate plans had violated security protocols that existed to protect not just me, but other intelligence personnel whose safety could be compromised if retired agents' locations and identities weren't properly protected. But Agent Martinez had more complex information to share about the legal implications of accessing my classified documents and the ongoing responsibilities that Michael and Sandra had acquired through their security breach. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, your access to classified materials requires you to sign non-disclosure agreements and accept legal obligations for protecting the information you discovered. What kind of legal obligations? Michael asked. Mr. Anderson, you're now legally bound to protect classified information from further disclosure. You cannot discuss Mrs. Johnson's career, her security requirements, or her operational background with anyone without federal authorization. Legal obligations that would affect Michael and Sandra's ability to discuss my background with other family members, friends, or professionals who might be involved in my care or housing decisions. Agent Martinez, Sandra asked. What happens if we accidentally reveal information we're not supposed to discuss? Mrs. Anderson, unauthorized disclosure of classified information is a federal crime that can result in prosecution, imprisonment, and permanent legal consequences. Federal crime, prosecution, imprisonment. Agent Martinez was explaining that Michael and Sandra's attempt to help with my housing situation had created legal responsibilities that would affect them for the rest of their lives. But we didn't know, Sandra protested. We thought we were helping an elderly family member with real estate decisions. Mrs. Anderson, lack of knowledge doesn't eliminate legal responsibility once classified information has been accessed. You're now bound by federal security requirements regardless of your original intent. Agent Martinez continued the briefing by explaining the ongoing security monitoring that would be required for Michael and Sandra, and the restrictions that would apply to their future interactions with my living situation and personal affairs. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, you'll be subject to periodic security reviews to ensure that you're maintaining proper protection of classified information. These reviews will include background investigations, interviews with associates, and monitoring of your activities. Ongoing security monitoring. Michael and Sandra's attempt to manage my affairs had resulted in federal oversight of their own lives and activities. Agent Martinez. Michael asked, how long will this monitoring continue? Mr. Anderson, security monitoring for individuals who have accessed classified materials typically continues indefinitely, with reviews conducted as often as security agencies determine necessary. Indefinitely, Michael and Sandra had created permanent complications in their lives by attempting to access documents they assumed were normal personal papers, but that were actually protected federal materials. But the most significant revelation was yet to come when Agent Martinez explained the broader implications of the security breach for my family relationships and my continued ability to maintain connections with people who had demonstrated unreliability with security matters. Mrs. Johnson, we need to discuss whether continued family contact is advisable given the security breach and the potential risks of maintaining relationships with individuals who have shown inability to respect security protocols. Continued family contact. Agent Martinez was raising the possibility that protecting classified information and maintaining operational security might require me to limit or eliminate relationships with family members who had created security risks.
Agent Martinez, what are you recommending regarding my family relationships?
Mrs. Johnson, we recommend restricted contact with family members who have accessed classified materials, ongoing monitoring of any interactions with these individuals, and consideration of relocation to a more secure living arrangement with better protection from family interference. The education that Michael and Sandra were receiving about security requirements, legal obligations, and federal oversight was transforming their understanding of their elderly mother, from someone who needed their help and management to someone whose background and legal status created complications that were far beyond their ability to understand or manage. Their attempt to sell my house and manage my living situation had revealed that some elderly adults have federal protections. security requirements, and legal statuses that make normal family decision-making impossible without government authorization and ongoing security reviews. 6 months after the federal security breach that had been created by Michael and Sandra's attempt to sell my house, our family relationships had been permanently restructured around security protocols, legal restrictions, and ongoing federal oversight that governed how we could interact and what information could be shared. Michael and Sandra had completed their security background investigations, signed non-disclosure agreements, and accepted ongoing federal monitoring of their activities and communications. Their attempt to help with my housing situation had transformed them from concerned family members into individuals who were permanently bound by national security requirements. "Mom, we need to talk about something that's been bothering us," Michael said during one of our carefully monitored family visits. "We've been meeting with federal agents every month for security reviews, and they keep asking us about your ongoing activities and connections." "Michael, what kinds of questions are they asking?" "They want to know who visits you, what phone calls you receive, whether you maintain contact with other retired federal personnel, and whether you seem to be involved in any activities that might indicate ongoing operational involvement." Ongoing operational involvement. Federal security agencies were monitoring my retirement activities to ensure that I wasn't maintaining authorized connections with current intelligence operations or sharing protected information with individuals who lacked appropriate clearance. "Mom, are you still involved with federal agencies? The security investigators seem to think you might be providing consulting services or maintaining operational connections." "Michael, retired intelligence personnel sometimes maintain consulting relationships or advisory connections with federal agencies when their expertise is needed for current operations or policy development." "So you're still working for the government?" "Michael, I'm occasionally asked to provide expertise or analysis related to my operational background, but these activities require security clearance and authorization that are beyond your clearance level to know about." That distinction was important for Michael to understand, that my retirement didn't mean complete separation from intelligence work, but transition to a different level of involvement that still required security protocols and protection of operational details. Sandra had been struggling with the legal restrictions that now governed her ability to discuss my background or our family situation with friends, extended family, or professional contacts. "Mary, I had to tell my sister that I can't discuss your living situation or your background because of legal restrictions. She thinks our family is involved in some kind of criminal activity." "Sandra, the legal restrictions exist to protect national security information and the safety of intelligence personnel. Your sister's assumptions about criminal activity reflect her lack of understanding about federal security requirements. But I can't explain that to her, because explaining it would violate the non-disclosure agreements I signed." "Sandra, that's correct. The non-disclosure agreements require you to protect information about intelligence operations and personnel even from family members who don't have security clearance." Agent Martinez continued conducting quarterly security reviews that assessed whether my family members were properly protecting classified information and whether their knowledge of my background created ongoing security risks. "Mrs. Johnson, we've been monitoring communications and activities of your family members to ensure compliance with security requirements. Overall, they're demonstrating appropriate discretion about your background and their access to classified materials." Agent Martinez, what does this mean for their ongoing legal status? "Mrs. Johnson, your family members will continue to be subject to security monitoring, but they've demonstrated understanding of their legal obligations and appropriate respect for security protocols." But Agent Martinez had more complex information to share about my own security status and the federal agency's assessment of my ongoing protection requirements. "Mrs. Johnson, we've also been reviewing your residential security and your ongoing protection needs, based on current threat assessments and intelligence regarding potential risks to retired operatives." Agent Martinez, what have you determined? "Mrs. Johnson, your current living situation meets security requirements, and we've determined that continued residence in your current location is advisable provided that security protocols are maintained." Continued residence in my current location. The house that Michael and Sandra had tried to sell was actually the most appropriate and secure living arrangement available for someone with my background and protection requirements. Agent Martinez, what about my family's request that I consider moving to housing that they consider more appropriate for my age?
Mrs. Johnson, assisted living facilities and family-supervised housing arrangements typically don't meet security requirements for retired intelligence personnel.
Your current residence provides protection features that would be unavailable in conventional eldercare facilities. Protection features that justified what my family had seen as excessive security measures, but that were actually professional-grade protective systems designed for individuals whose careers had created ongoing security risks. The most significant development in our family relationships had been Michael and Sandra's growing understanding of why elderly adults might have backgrounds, legal protections, and security requirements that aren't apparent from their current lifestyle or family interactions. Mom, I want to apologize for assuming that we knew what was best for your living situation. We had no idea that you had security requirements that were more important than our concerns about aging and dependence. Michael, your concerns about aging and dependence were well-intentioned, but they were based on assumptions about my background and my needs that didn't account for the complexity of my situation. And now that we know about your federal career, now you understand that some elderly adults have legal protections, security requirements, and ongoing professional obligations that make normal family decision-making processes inappropriate or impossible. Sandra had developed genuine respect for the complexity of intelligence work and the ongoing responsibilities that continued during retirement. Betty, I've been reading about intelligence careers in retirement security. I had no idea that federal agents face ongoing risks and responsibilities that continue for decades after they stop active service. Sandra, most people don't understand the long-term implications of intelligence work or the security requirements that protect both retired operatives and current operations. And that's why you couldn't just move to assisted living like we wanted? Sandra, assisted living facilities can't provide the security measures, communication protocols, or protection features that are required for someone with my operational background. As our family gathered for dinner in the secure dining room of the house that had once been scheduled for unauthorized sale, I realized that Michael and Sandra's attempt to manage my living situation had accomplished something more important than just preventing a real estate transaction. It had revealed the hidden complexities of retirement security for intelligence personnel and the importance of understanding that elderly adults might have backgrounds, legal protections, and ongoing professional obligations that aren't apparent from their family roles or their current lifestyle. My granddaughter Emma, who was now old enough to understand some aspects of the family's security situation, asked the question that addressed the broader implications of our experience. Grandma Betty, do you think there are other elderly people whose families don't know about their backgrounds or their security requirements? Emma, I think there are retired military personnel, intelligence operatives, law enforcement officers, and other professionals whose families might be unaware of their service records, their ongoing legal obligations, or their security needs. And their families might make assumptions about their capabilities or their living requirements without understanding their actual backgrounds. Emma, families often make decisions about elderly relatives based on age-related assumptions rather than investigating their complete life history, their current legal status, or their ongoing professional obligations. Emma's questions reflected the kind of awareness that I hoped would prevent other families from making the mistakes that Michael and Sandra had made when they assumed they could manage my affairs without understanding my background or my legal protections. The moral of this story: never assume that the elderly adults in your life don't have backgrounds, legal obligations, or security requirements that you know nothing about. Never make decisions about elderly relatives' housing, finances, or personal affairs without investigating their complete life history and current legal status. And never underestimate the possibility that someone's retirement might involve ongoing professional obligations, federal oversight, or security protocols that make normal family decision-making inappropriate or impossible. That's how an attempted house sale became a federal security investigation that revealed the hidden complexities of intelligence retirement and family relationships. That's how assumptions about elderly decline and dependency became education about ongoing professional obligations and legal protections that continue long after active service ends. Life has a way of proving that our assumptions about elderly adults' backgrounds and capabilities are often incomplete or entirely wrong. Sometimes the most important discovery families can make is that their elderly relatives might have service records, security clearances, and ongoing legal obligations that create responsibilities and protections extending far beyond anything normal families typically encounter. I have more stories about retired professionals whose families underestimated their backgrounds, violated their security requirements, and learned important lessons about the hidden complexities of military intelligence and law enforcement careers that continue to affect retirees' lives in ways that families might never imagine. So pull up a chair, Maybe ask an elderly family member about their complete career history before making assumptions about their capabilities or their living requirements. And remember that the person whose house you want to sell might have federal protection requirements that make your real estate plans a national security issue. Because we're only just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next.